At the heart of the politics of Northern Ireland is the twilight world of the intelligence war, the deadly battle between the security forces and the IRA. This is the root of the controversy over the Stalker affair, with the government determined to protect its agents and informers. Operations in this secret world are seldom revealed, although their results are occasionally seen. Last month, police in the Irish Republic uncovered a huge cache of arms, believed to be but a fraction of an arsenal of awesome firepower from Libya to the IRA, and more were seized last week. Tonight, Panorama assesses the military and political strategies in what both sides call the Long War. The Long War started 20 years ago, with stones being thrown in Londonderry. Last month, as dusk gathered over the annual commemoration of Bloody Sunday, little appeared to have changed. But the IRA's new Libyan arms may now dramatically change the picture. A rocket launcher could tear this armoured Land Rover apart. A surface-to-air missile could knock this helicopter out of the sky. The IRA may be stronger today than many people think, given the series of devastating setbacks it suffered last year. On the face of it, 1987 was a year the IRA would prefer to forget. On the 27th of October, a French customs aircraft spotted a boat off the northwest tip of Spain. It was called the Exxon. On board were 150 tons of arms from Libya to the IRA. Their interception was a massive blow. Less than a fortnight later, there was Enniskillen. A bomb intended for the security forces killed 11 civilians on Remembrance Day Sunday. There was universal outrage. One of the repercussions, albeit a temporary one, was a boost for the Anglo-Irish Agreement, the mechanism by which London and Dublin hoped to defeat the IRA. For the Provisionals, who claimed to attack only military targets, Enniskillen was a major defeat on the propaganda front. The Long War is partly financed with dollars from America, but there's no sign that Enniskillen has made the IRA supporters there think again. In New York, at last month's annual dinner for NORAID, the IRA's fundraising arm in America, the disposition of 800 well-groomed guests was not upset by any reference to the carnage of Enniskillen or the loss of the arms on the Exxon. And Loch Gall, the IRA's other great disaster of 1987, was paraded as a victory. A police station in the village of Loch Gall was bombed by the IRA last May, but the police and SAS were lying in wait and shot dead the 8 members of the IRA unit. In New York, they were saluted as heroes.
Seamus Donnelly was the youngest of the Irish Republican Army volunteers killed at Loughborough. He was only 19 when he was gunned down by British forces.
Star attraction at the dinner, with clerical approval, was Seamus Toomey, the IRA's chief of staff in the 70s. He was the architect of Bloody Friday, the day IRA car bombs killed 9 people. Toomey hasn't mellowed with age.
England only understands one thing. Now, the one thing that she understands is coming from the barrel of a gun. Nothing else but that. Victory to the IRA.
Toomey was also one of the architects of the Long War. He gave his supporters the message they'd paid $45 a head to hear, that despite the setbacks, the IRA had never been in a stronger position. How sophisticated is the weaponry that the IRA now has?
Well, as regards sophistication, it's 1,000,000% better than when we were fighting and struggling back in 69 and 70.
How do you know the IRA has this sophisticated weaponry?
It's quite simple to know that, because I was in a position to know.
General Sir James Glover was also in a position to know the IRA's strength. He's a former commander of the Army in Northern Ireland and a former head of military intelligence. Sir James retired 6 months ago as Commander-in-Chief of the Army UK. His knowledge of the IRA is almost without equal. This is the first interview he has given on the organisation he studied for over a decade. 10 years ago, he analysed the threat posed by the IRA in a document called Future Terrorist Trends. Its classification was secret. During its circulation, a copy was lost. The contents became public. General Glover's predictions were to prove remarkably accurate. He warned, the IRA will still be able to attract enough people with leadership talent, good education and manual skills to enhance their all-round professionalism. Arms will be readily available. A few costly prestige weapons, such as surface-to-air missiles, cannot be ruled out.
They are not just a bunch of mindless hoodlums and hooligans. And they do have in their midst some astute, highly intelligent, very professional terrorists. I believe that they are still, as I identified then, dedicated to what they call the Long War, and I believe that they must still be hoping gradually to erode HMG's determination to defeat terrorism by themselves, carrying out this protracted campaign of attrition.
Gerry Adams, now Westminster MP for the IRA's political wing Sinn Féin, accepts Enniskillen damaged the cause, but not the commitment to the Long War.
The commitment to the Long War, I suppose, is an indication that while Republicans would like to have it over quickly, that they're prepared to keep slogging for as long as the British refuse to leave us in peace.
In reality, isn't the Long War unwinnable because there is no sign that any British government is going to leave Ireland at the point of a gun?
Well, they have plenty of practice leaving everywhere else.
But not Ireland?
Well, the same thing was said about Zimbabwe, the same thing was said about Aden, about Palestine, about India.
The strategy of the Republican movement, that's the name for the IRA and Sinn Féin, was outlined at a conference in the wake of the hunger strike by one of its leaders, Danny Morrison. Who here will object, he said, if, with the ballot paper in this hand and the Armalite in this hand, we take power in Ireland? Thus, the course was set. The Long War was to be waged on two fronts, the military and the political. But the more important instrument in the Long War has always been the Armalite, the military campaign. The Republican movement sees the IRA as the cutting edge of its strategy. This is what it calls armed propaganda, a video recording it made last year at a secret training camp across the border. It's part of its international propaganda offensive designed to raise money and support in America and elsewhere. The IRA is organised on a 32-county basis, with a northern command that fights the war and a southern command that provides the arms and logistical support. Only around 400 active volunteers are needed to maintain instability in the north. Over the years, the IRA has developed its own weaponry, like this homemade grenade launcher. But now, thanks to the shipments from Libya, it has a whole new generation of sophisticated weapons. We've traced how this huge arsenal came into IRA hands. The seizure of the Exxon is only the beginning of the story. It was sighted by a French customs spotter plane on the lookout for two boats suspected of running drugs. The Exund sailed into their net. What is remarkable is that the authorities insist there was no intelligence whatsoever behind the interception. If that is true, the biggest seizure of terrorist arms ever made anywhere in the world happened by pure chance.
Uniforme Delta, la dernière, la 29 en service.
Back at base, checks were made on the boat. The Exund fitted the classic profile of a drug runner. The plane was in direct contact with a high-speed customs patrol boat. The order was given to move in.
First, we come on the bridge and we find 5 persons. 3 of these persons have a diving suit, and 1 of the 3 persons on the diving suit have a battle dress.
What did you suspect?
In first, when we know the nationality of these 5 people, I think arms, only arms, no drugs, no cigarettes, no other things, only arms.
The Irish captain was a former merchant seaman called Adrian Hopkins. He was using his own name and passport, as was one of his associates, Henry Cairns. Travelling on false passports were the other 3, the nucleus of the IRA unit running the guns. They were using aliases. Their real names were James Doherty and James Cole from County Donegal, and their leader, Gabriel Cleary, believed to have been the IRA's top munitions expert and director of engineering. Cleary is also thought to have been one of several IRA men allegedly trained on a missile simulator in Libya. The Exund was taken into custody. It was then that the customs discovered what was on board. At least 20 surface-to-air missiles, SAM-7s, 2 cases of RPG-7 rocket launchers, 1,000 Czech-made AK-47 rifles, 2 tons of an explosive the IRA has used before called Semtex, and a huge quantity of machine guns, mortars and grenades. In the hands of the IRA, such weaponry could dramatically alter the course of the campaign. A SAM-7, a portable surface-to-air missile, can knock a helicopter out of the sky from 2 miles away. An RPG-7 can blow a hole in a tank. And a handful of the undetectable plastic explosive called Semtex can have a devastating effect. The Exund started its voyage to collect the weaponry from this berth in Malta. The crew flew to join it from all over Europe. It left Malta on the 11th of October and headed for Libya, 170 miles away. 2 days later, it was met in Tripoli harbour by Libyan officials. It was escorted to the military sector. One of the welcoming party is believed to have been Azur Nasser, a senior Libyan intelligence officer who acted as Libya's go-between with the IRA. The holes were ready. They were filled in Tripoli docks under cover of darkness to avoid American satellite reconnaissance. It took 2 nights, with the Exund putting out to sea during the day. All the markings on the crates had been sanded off, apparently by Libyan soldiers, to disguise their country of origin. The donor was to remain anonymous. Precisely how Adrian Hopkins became involved is impossible to say. He has no known IRA sympathies. But as a former merchant seaman, Hopkins had the maritime skills the IRA needed. He may have been pressurized into making them available. Only the captain of the Exund and the IRA know the true story. Certainly he's had a checkered career. In the early 70s, Adrian Hopkins ran a company called Bray Horse-Drawn Caravans, which invited tourists to see Ireland and save petrol. But the business was extinguished when the caravans went up in flames. Bray Travel then widened the horizon, pioneering cheap holidays in the sun. It became one of the biggest tour operators in Ireland. In 1980, the company went out of business, owing its creditors over £1 million. But hundreds of passengers were left stranded.
All the passengers are now back, and they had their holiday more or less in the normal way. But yet there have been people who paid money to go on holidays.
Oh yes,
and
all the passengers who were due to go on holidays have not been carried and will not be carried, and they have lost their money.
Hopkins then went into the boat business, using Malta as a base. The IRA told him to find suitable ships and deliver them here. Intelligence flowing from the Exund and elsewhere indicates that Hopkins made 4 previous trips, 2 in 1985 and 2 in 1986. The total number of arms on board those 4 shipments is believed to have been roughly equal to the 150 tons seized on board the Exund. All that is information in the hands of the British, French and Irish intelligence authorities. Of course, it's not proof. There'll only be proof when the arms are seized or used. We have established the boats believed to have been used for the 4 shipments, the cargoes said to have been carried, and the route they're thought to have followed. Tripoli was where each consignment came from. Malta was where the boats were berthed. And the destination was the same in each case, the east coast of Ireland, a small beach near Arklow, 50 miles south of Dublin. According to intelligence agencies, the first boat Hopkins used was the Kula, a small converted fishing boat he bought for £45,000. The Kula's first trip was made in August 1985. It was loaded 5 miles off Malta with 7 tons of arms. Among them were 70 AK-47s and a consignment of Taurus pistols. According to the same sources, the Kula's second trip was made in October 85. Again, it was loaded just off Malta, this time with 10 tons of arms, including 100 AK-47s, 10 machine guns and 70 boxes of ammunition. But it was the Kula's third shipment in July 1986 that the IRA had been waiting for. 14 tons loaded 5 miles off Malta's twin island of Gozo. It contained 4 surface-to-air missiles, SAM-7s. The Kula landed all its cargoes by rubber dinghy at Clogher Strand, a deserted beach a mile south of Arklow. When Irish police searched the area last November in the wake of the seizure of the Exund, they found one of the inflatable dinghies slashed, lying underwater some way out. But there were even more arms to come. In April 1986, American F-111s raided Tripoli from bases in England.
An extraordinary series of events last night in Tripoli. At 9 o'clock, shore batteries and ships in the harbour opened up.
Gaddafi vowed revenge. Even greater support for the IRA may have been his way of exacting it. Following the raid, Hopkins apparently needed a bigger boat to accommodate the huge shipment of arms now on offer from Gaddafi. This was the ship he bought in August 86. It was twice the size of the Kula. He bought it for £45,000 and sailed it to Malta. Here he changed its name from the Syjarmor to the Villa, a tactic he used with all his boats to make them more difficult to trace and confuse the authorities. The fourth consignment, believed to have been on board the Villa in October 1986, was of a different order altogether. This time it consisted of a huge shipment of 105 tons containing an unknown quantity of SAM-7s. But because of its size and the possibility of its attracting suspicion, it was loaded not off the coast of Malta, but 50 miles off the coast of Libya. Transferring 105 tons onto the Villa at sea must have been difficult enough, but getting the cargo ashore when it finally reached its destination on the east coast of Ireland would have posed a logistical nightmare. Now, it's this fourth consignment that poses a central question. Could the IRA have unloaded 105 tons of arms in 2 rubber dinghies, each dinghy only capable of carrying around 1 ton apiece? To have done so would have meant that each dinghy would have to have made around 50 trips. Faced with these difficulties, we understand the decision was made to unload the cargo not at Clogher Strand, but at a jetty at the end of it, known as Roadstone Pier. There's no suggestion that the owners of the pier knew anything about it. This time, trucks are said to have been used to convey the consignment inland.
Now, there's been talk of a consignment of 105 tons. Now, that amounts to some 30 lorry loads of weapons and explosives. Now, the problems there are huge. You've got to get them off the boats covertly, acquire this fleet of lorries, move it across the south of Ireland, presumably, find the caches, secure the caches, hide the weapons, look after the weapons, and then subsequently move them up into the operational area.
Without anybody finding out?
Exactly. And all this involves large numbers of the rank and file who are not renowned for either their reticence or their modesty.
Bunkers concealed underground were waiting across the country to store the IRA's arsenal. This is one of them uncovered by the Irish security forces. The bunker was empty when it was discovered. Arms could have been stored away here for years, assuming nobody noticed what was going on. How could the IRA unload 105 tons of weaponry and none of your intelligence services know about it?
That is something that is causing us concern. Putting it very bluntly to you, but very honestly, that has caused concern that at the particular time we did not have any intelligence that this was about to happen, nor indeed did we know that it did happen.
Is that not an indictment of your intelligence services?
It's certainly something that's causing us concern. And might I say that it's something that we would hope to put right, and I think we have taken steps in recent times to ensure that sort of thing will not happen again.
If there was no intelligence, would that not indicate a serious gap in the intelligence system?
If there had been no intelligence at all, yes, you're quite right. If there had been no intelligence, but I haven't commented or stated that that was a fact.
Well, if there had been intelligence, one would have thought the arms wouldn't have got in.
It depends on the nature of the intelligence. It's not a subject which, and I know you will understand, I would not wish to pursue that.
What sort of quantities are you talking about?
I would hesitate to begin to quantify the type of weapons, but I would say that there are many tons of weaponry which have been fairly accurately identified, and the seizures already made both in Donegal and the Republic of Ireland and very recently here in Northern Ireland.
We understand that the total amount of arms shipped in on 4 consignments prior to the seizure of the Exund were roughly about the same size. That's about 150 tons.
I have no reason to disagree with that.
If they develop the expertise, if the weapons are there, if they get them up into the operational area, in a sense, without wishing to over-exaggerate, I think that the battlefield could change.
The most vulnerable targets are helicopters, which to date have remained out of IRA range. For the security forces, they're the arteries of supply across Northern Ireland. In certain border areas, there's no alternative, as IRA landmines have made the roads unsafe. And they're also the most secure means of transport for VIPs. A successful SAM-7 attack would mark a frightening escalation, but it would come as no surprise.
I mean, the army has been anticipating this for years. And so, therefore, the countermeasures are there, are prepared. Both the tactical countermeasures and the technical ones.
To date, the countermeasures have not been tested, and the security forces remain on full alert. Sweeps continue on both sides of the border, but Dublin believes that not all the arms are in the south.
There is a view here that it's possible that a number or quantity of the arms and explosives will have already found their way into Northern Ireland even before the Exund was detected.
And the SAM-7s?
May very well be.
In Northern Ireland?
May very well be.
Do you believe they may be in Northern Ireland?
I have no reason to doubt that they are on the island of Ireland. As to where they are precisely, there is an element of doubt about that. I certainly will say that I believe them to be within this island.
How many of them do you think there are?
That's not a question I would like to answer directly, but I'm satisfied that they exist.
The race is now on both sides of the border to find the arms before they find their targets. Although luck plays its part, the key to uncovering the caches or intercepting the weapons in transit is intelligence. That is a crucial battleground in the long war, because the side with the superior intelligence can stay one move ahead.
All my life, people have hated the police and army. I was reared in streets filled with their guns, so I've always looked the other way when the lads were having a go. Who cares, I thought? And when something really rough happened, I just...
Intelligence is about information, and the government is currently running this commercial in Northern Ireland to encourage people to give it. Every scrap of information, every grain of intelligence is vital to deprive the IRA of what it needs most to survive, secrecy.
I phoned that confidential telephone number and told them what I know. You see, I want a decent future, and that's not going to happen while these heroes are screwing it up for everybody.
But the real intelligence war is fought out on the ground, in a John le Carré world of agents and informers run by the intelligence services.
Intelligence is the key. Without it, you tend to flounder around. You have to adopt the broad swipe rather than the rapier thrust. And you can then pay the penalty of operating a little clumsily and thereby running the risk of antagonizing the very people whom you are trying to protect. And I always used to say that bring me a terrorist who can work for me, and don't bring me a terrorist.
Why did you say that?
Because he would, of course, be able, or there's a chance, he will be able to give me the intelligence I needed, preemptive intelligence.
It's a deadly game. Those who play it and lose know the penalty. Frank Hegarty lost on a lonely border road, a lone victim of the intelligence war. His eyes taped, his hands tied, he'd been shot in the head by the IRA. His body was found in May '86. The IRA said he'd been working for British intelligence for over 5 years. Frank Hegarty was an IRA man from Derry, connected with the Quartermaster's Department, which looks after the IRA's arms. The significance of Frank Hegarty is that he's the informer believed to have pinpointed the farmhouses where some of the Cooler's early consignments were hidden. They were uncovered in Sligo and Roscommon in January 1986. They included 84 AK-47 and a box of Taurus pistols, believed to have been shipped in on the Cooler's first trip. One crate was faintly marked Libyan Armed Forces, leaving no doubt about the origin. This seizure explains why agents and informers are so critical in undermining the IRA's capacity to wage the long war. But Frank Hegarty's cover was blown. Martin McGuinness, as the Sinn Féin leader in Derry, was familiar with the Hegarty case.
Well, I mean, if Republican activists who know what the repercussions are for going over to the other side, in fact go over to the other side, then they, more than anyone else, are totally and absolutely aware of what the penalty for doing that is.
Death.
Death, certainly.
Frank Hegarty is thought to have been recruited in Derry in 1979 and encouraged to work his way up within the IRA. The evening before the arms were seized, he knew he was going away. He took his common-law wife out for a last drink.
Well, we're out as usual on a Saturday night and we're having a drink. And he said to me, you know, I'm going away tomorrow. He said, if I don't make it tomorrow, you won't see me for a long time. I had asked him what was he doing? He said, I can't tell you.
The next morning, as the arms were uncovered, Frank Hegarty vanished. He's believed to have gone to the Foyle Bridge just outside Derry and been spirited away by British intelligence officers. According to the IRA, Hegarty spent the next 3 months in protective custody at this house in Sittingbourne, Kent, then owned by the Ministry of Defence. His wife was allowed one visit. She was flown to Gatwick and taken to the Copthorne Hotel, where she met Hegarty and his minders. One of them is alleged to have offered her £100,000 to include a house, a car and a trust fund for the children if she would vanish with Hegarty. She refused.
So when they closed the door, I asked them who the men were. I said they were MI5, they were Maggie Thatcher's men. And I said, how did you get to be with these men? And they said that he was lifted off the street that morning.
Do you think they were MI5?
I don't know. I can't answer that, Fred. I don't know.
A month later, inexplicably, Hegarty returned to Derry, maintaining his innocence. He said he'd been set up to protect another informer. He was subsequently interrogated by the IRA and shot dead. The IRA issued a statement saying that Hegarty had made a confession, detailing his involvement with British intelligence. The family still believe that Frank Hegarty was innocent and sacrificed to protect another informer highly placed within the IRA. One day, they say, they will prove it. There's still great sensitivity about the Hegarty case on all sides. Had he not chosen to return to Derry, British intelligence would have carried out its part of the bargain, to protect its agent to the end. Why is intelligence so crucial?
Well, one of the evil things about terrorism is that they seek, of course, to destroy all evidence, whether it's human, in other words, whether it's the intimidation of witnesses, making it very difficult to get evidence. If you're fighting under the rule of law, bringing people before the courts, you have to have evidence, and that's very difficult to get. And therefore, intelligence which may help you to prevent outrages, that actually may enable you to perhaps discover weapons as well, and prevent terrorist crimes, is become very important indeed.
To protect the vital intelligence, the government needs to protect the providers, as the Stalker controversy so vividly illustrates. John Stalker entered the world of intelligence and found it loath to surrender its secrets. Nearly 2 years ago, Panorama revealed why John Stalker had run into trouble. As Deputy Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, he was asked to investigate why officers from the RUC's elite anti-terrorist unit had given false accounts of 3 shooting incidents in 1982. In this one, 3 unarmed IRA men were shot dead. The officers said they'd told cover stories to protect the identity of informants. Stalker discovered that one of the informers who provided the information that led to this shooting was an MI5 agent who was paid around £30,000 for his services. But Stalker couldn't get all the facts. He was removed from the inquiry in disputed circumstances at a crucial point. Colin Sampson, the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, completed the investigation. He made the same recommendation as Stalker, that police officers should be prosecuted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Last month, the Attorney General, Sir Patrick Mayhew, announced that there would be no prosecution of RUC officers in the interest of national security. It was a clear message to all agents and informers that whatever the political cost, the government will stand by them to the end. What caused the controversy was the Attorney General's statement that there was evidence that criminal offences had been committed. He had to strike a delicate balance between the requirements of justice and national security.
There's a balance here. That balance has been decided very firmly and very clearly by the Attorney General. On the facts as I know them to be, I believe it was a right decision in all the circumstances.
I mean, I've heard lots of people, tremendous authorities, on the way this matter should have been handled. And if you say to them, but if it meant that a number of lives were at risk, and if it meant the risk of serious terrorist outrages, for example, what would you do? People then say, oh, well, of course, that's a bit more difficult, isn't it? And that's the reality of responsibility, that you have to weigh up all these things.
When you say a number of lives were at risk, are they the lives of agents and informers working for British intelligence?
I can't comment on individual circumstances, but I have tried quite honestly, and I think people were surprised at my frankness in the House of Commons, in explaining what some of the considerations are, some of the background problems that we find in the fight against terrorism.
Mr. King has now moved to lower the temperature by announcing a review of whether disciplinary proceedings would be appropriate. But Dublin remains unimpressed. The Stalker controversy has now brought the world of intelligence to the very centre of Northern Ireland politics. Before going to Northern Ireland, soldiers are given lectures on the IRA and shown videos about it, some of them foreign. They also learn about the IRA's strategy to broaden support for its campaign by widening the appeal of its political wing, Sinn Féin. At the end of the lecture, they have no illusions about the link between the Armalite and the ballot box.
In 1983 then, again in their annual conference, Sinn Féin's president, Gerry Adams, said, "I'm glad this opportunity to pay tribute to the freedom fighters, the men and women volunteers of the IRA."
An IRA document of a decade ago that outlined the basis of the IRA of today leaves no doubt who is in charge. Sinn Féin should come under army organisers at all levels.
I find it difficult to differentiate between the two. I know that members of Provisional Sinn Féin, and particularly locally elected members, are encouraged, I use that word carefully, encouraged to be volunteers in Provisional IRA. I'm not saying that they all are, but they are all encouraged to be. I do know that and I've used the phrase before, and I think it's a very apt phrase, the murder executives of the Provisional IRA rest comfortably within Provisional Sinn Féin.
Are you saying that the leadership of Sinn Féin is also the leadership of the IRA?
I would say that they're not separate at all, and that they certainly overlap considerably.
Are you saying that there are Sinn Féin councillors in Northern Ireland who are also active members of the IRA?
I'm satisfied of that.
In the political arena, the council chambers of Northern Ireland, the battle between Sinn Féin and its opponents is intense. This is a vital theatre of the long war. Sinn Féin now has one Westminster MP, Gerry Adams, and 59 councillors throughout Northern Ireland's town halls. This outrages the Unionists and presents the government with a problem. It won't talk to Sinn Féin, but expects others to do so in conducting council business. This problem is most acute in Belfast. Unionist politicians feel they've been left high and dry by the government to take on Sinn Féin on their own. They control Belfast City Council and bitterly resent having to sit in the same room as the people the government refuses to talk to. They're doing all they can to sabotage Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin's 9 councillors form the largest single party on the opposition benches. 2 of them have been convicted of terrorist offences, one for IRA membership and possession of a firearm, the other for possession of ammunition. A third was convicted for escaping from lawful custody. He was Alex Maskey, currently top of the Unionist hate list. Councillor Maskey was gunned down by loyalists last May and narrowly survived. On the day of the meeting of the Gas Committee last December, feelings against Maskey were running even higher on the Unionist side because he'd just been banned from entering England, Scotland and Wales. But there was nothing stopping him from entering Belfast City Hall. Unionists planned to sabotage the meeting to show their contempt for Maskey and Sinn Féin. They considered holding it in another room without telling the opposition. But a Sinn Féin councillor moved in first to thwart them. In the end, Sinn Féin entered the committee room, the Unionists did not. They boycotted the meeting. It was abandoned because there wasn't a quorum. For the parties involved, these manoeuvres are not a charade. They're deadly serious.
That's what these people represent. They represent the IRA, and we're not prepared to sit down with them. If the government refused to meet them, the Secretary of State refuses to talk to them, I don't see why they should foist it upon us to have to sit down and do business with these people.
Unionists have repeatedly demanded that the government should proscribe Sinn Féin, making it illegal like the IRA. Thus its members would be banned from the council. But the government is loath to do so, not least because it would hand Sinn Féin a powerful piece of propaganda. Instead, it's suggesting that all councillors swear an oath that they do not support violence. But it looks as if Sinn Féin will sign it. Are all Sinn Féin councillors in Northern Ireland members of the IRA now?
I cannot speak for all Sinn Féin councillors. As far as I'm concerned, Sinn Féin councillors are members of Sinn Féin, and their support for the Irish Republican Army is on record, and as far as I'm concerned, that suffices.
Are you a member of the IRA?
No, I'm not a member of the IRA.
If you were asked to join the IRA as a Sinn Féin councillor, would you join?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's a hypothetical question. I am a Republican activist. I will continue on the type of work that I'm involved in, and hopefully we will reach a successful conclusion.
They have served time as IRA activists. They have done prison sentences as IRA activists. We even have Sinn Féin councillors in some council chambers in Northern Ireland who have served time for blowing up the council chambers in which they're now sitting. Now, no other country in the world would allow that kind of situation to exist.
I mean, prescription we certainly keep under review, and I have always made that clear, that this is an issue that many push forward. One has to consider how effective it could be, because you have to prescribe a designated organisation. People can just change their names and bounce up in other incarnations. But this is something we do keep under review, because I absolutely share that sense of outrage at the abuse of the democratic process.
But although Sinn Féin won 2 more seats at by-elections in Belfast last autumn, the surge in their support in the whole province has been stemmed. In last June's general election, it was the SDLP, their rival for the nationalist vote, that won an additional seat at Westminster, not Sinn Féin. The dent in their support and the rise in the fortunes of the SDLP are largely due to the Anglo-Irish Agreement. The Anglo-Irish Agreement was signed by Mrs. Thatcher and the then Irish Prime Minister Dr. Fitzgerald in November 1985. The venue was Hillsborough Castle, long the seat of the governors of Northern Ireland. In the splendour of its drawing room, the historic agreement was signed. The agreement is the cornerstone of Britain's strategy to ensure victory in the long war, and it's a direct response to the Armalite and the ballot box. The aim is to neutralise the IRA through improved security cooperation with Dublin, and to marginalise Sinn Féin by setting up, it's hoped at some stage, a devolved government in Northern Ireland in which the SDLP would play a major role, thereby draining support from Sinn Féin. As far as Dublin is concerned, in return for improved security cooperation, the agreement gave it the right to have its voice heard in the running of Northern Ireland, from security and politics to the administration of justice.
It's the jewel in the crown of British counterinsurgency strategy. It is the fusion, the coming together of all the strands of economic, social, military, political elements, bringing it all together and fusing it into an effort in classical counterinsurgency style to defeat the IRA and to marginalise or make irrelevant Sinn Féin. I think it also has an effect which should not be underestimated of insulating the British from international criticism of their role, and I think it also has the effect of, if you like, putting Dublin in a position where Dublin's involvement will be trotted out forever and a day by the British in justification of either their policies or their actual presence.
The Anglo-Irish Agreement is hated by Unionists as well as Sinn Féin because it challenges their intransigence too. When it was signed over 2 years ago, Unionists threatened to make the province ungovernable. The government has weathered the storm. But it now has to implement the most difficult part of its strategy if it is to marginalise Sinn Féin. It has to persuade Unionists to enter a new Northern Ireland government with Sinn Féin's rival for the nationalist vote, the SDLP. But the Unionist leaders, Ian Paisley and James Molyneux, have made it clear to Secretary of State Tom King that they're not prepared to enter any talks unless the agreement is suspended. Any weakening of the agreement to meet Unionist demands might drive away the SDLP, who've been the main beneficiaries of it, at the expense of Sinn Féin. At the moment, their leader John Hume talks from a position of strength.
Only by working to break down the barriers will agreement on how we live together in Ireland ever come. And that unity will be all the more real, because no one need fear it.
The government hopes that if the deadlock can be broken, nationalists who support Sinn Féin may switch their allegiance to the SDLP, recognising that constitutional politics, not the Armalite and the ballot box, will give nationalists a share in government. John Hume is also trying to improve the climate for political progress by talking with Sinn Féin's president, Gerry Adams, although they have met on occasions before. Hume hopes the talks may persuade Adams to prevail upon the IRA to end its campaign.
I hope that they will achieve an end to all violent and military activity in Northern Ireland. And I've said repeatedly, I'm willing to talk to anyone if it'll bring peace here, no matter who that anyone is. I have reason to believe from the third party who arranged this meeting that there was an opportunity to explore the possibility of bringing all violence to an end, and I believed it was my duty to do so, and I'm doing that.
But the IRA has made it clear that it will only cease hostilities once Britain declares its intention to withdraw from Northern Ireland. Far from doing that, the government is strengthening its military position. Along one stretch of the border, the army has constructed a chain of observation posts. They dominate the high ground and monitor all movement. And, no doubt in anticipation of the new threat from the IRA's Libyan arms, another brigade has been sent in to reinforce the frontier. Improving cross-border security at checkpoints like this in the Irish Republic is the other purpose of the Anglo-Irish Agreement. But much depends on political will. The agreement is designed to strengthen Dublin's commitment to wage war on the IRA. But Dublin has to proceed with care. The police here at Black Lion are accepted by the community, and they're unarmed. An intensive campaign against the IRA might upset this delicate balance. Dublin does not want a paramilitary police force.
Hello, Belcoo. Black Lion here again. Just testing the line there. Anything new?
A direct line to the IUC station a mile away at Belcoo is one thing, but the last thing the Irish police want is their premises turned into fortresses like the IUC stations on the other side of the border, sandbagged against the IRA's mortars. The danger is that the Stalker affair may also have damaged an already delicate cross-border relationship.
I would sincerely hope that any of the difficulties that it gives rise to, and it gives rise to many, that we will in time be able to overcome them. That we want to and that we will try, but isn't it a pity and isn't it a shame that people at the other side couldn't see things as we do? Isn't it a pity that the cooperation that we all want to see as a result of the Anglo-Irish Conference and the successes that we all want for it weren't taken into consideration at the time decisions were made arising from the Stalker-Sampson affair? I say this with regret. It makes our job much more difficult.
The British thought national security was more important.
Well, as you say, if the purpose of the decision was for the protection or preservation of informants and whatever reasons, I don't think that's a good enough reason that law should be broken, that people should be instructed to commit perjury, that people who seemingly could have been charged with shoot-to-kill policy and people who perverted justice in every way. That's not how a law enforcement agency can or should command respect of those that it's meant to protect.
Do you fear that cross-border cooperation may have been damaged as a result of the Stalker affair?
No, I hope not. I hope not at all. I think that, first of all, It would be very illogical if it was. We're talking about things that happened 6 years ago, and that cross-border security cooperation has been going ahead well in the last year, 2 years, and that's the reality of the people of today in the RUC and the Garda, but also because it's overwhelmingly in both our interests.
The IRA has already benefited from the cross-border repercussions of the Stalker affair. Dublin has suspended the regular meetings between the two chief constables. And last week's shooting of a Catholic youth at a border checkpoint has alienated nationalists still more. Before last month's commemoration of Bloody Sunday, the Provisionals were on the defensive, condemned by the world for Enniskillen. They had nothing with which to fight back. No internment, no hunger strike, no supergrasses. They now have the issue they so desperately need. The propaganda tables have been turned. To nationalists, the government appears to be placing the security forces above the law. It's what the Provisionals had always said.
This is partly a propaganda battle, and others will seek to exploit it. I don't think there's anything the IRA can do that will ever expunge the awful horror and the common feeling of revulsion that Enniskillen produced myself.
However important the propaganda war, it's the weapons for the real war that count. And thanks to Colonel Gaddafi, the IRA now seem to have plenty of them. They're reported to be unconcerned by recent seizures. This may be bravado, or it may be they know that their bunkers are full. They believe the long war will last a long time. But the IRA have no illusions about an outright military victory. They're committed to a war of attrition, their strategy to wear down Britain's political will to stay.
And there can be no military victory for the British, or no military solution. And unlike the British, the IRA aren't trying for a military solution. The IRA are fighting for political objectives, clear-cut political objectives, and for a political solution. I do believe that if anyone looks at the history of this struggle, that they must conclude that the British aren't going to win.
Northern Ireland today is a different place to what it was a decade ago. The RUC now patrol the IRA stronghold of the Bogside, although still not welcomed with open arms.
Get out of Bogside!
And the IRA's tactics have changed. The attacks now tend to be more selective. Among the latest victims, 2 UDR soldiers killed in Belfast last week.
People within the Republican movement, and certainly I think on the extremes of it, have seen the long war, if you call it that. They've seen 20 years, in which, so far from going forwards in terms of increasing nationalist support, increasing international respect for their activities, in terms of undermining the morale of the RUC, of making the British Army less willing to support, they're actually going backwards in all those respects. Now, they may believe with Libyan arms, they may think somehow they can significantly tilt that balance. I think increasingly I sense in Northern Ireland, across both communities, a great weariness expressed very much, exploded in that thought at Enniskillen. And I sense people feeling that they want an end of this violence, that the men of violence have nothing to offer, and they want a democratic way forward.
The army has been active now in Northern Ireland for nearly 20 years. For many, no doubt, that seems long enough. But the new observation posts along the border are symbolic of the government's military and political commitment to the long war. They're built to last.
If you look back over the improvements of the last few years, and we sometimes tend to forget these, the level of violence has dropped immeasurably. And this is a real criterion of the success of HMG's policy, tackling the problems along the triune of government, the economy, and security. And certainly Northern Ireland today is a very different place to be in, to live in, than it was a few years ago.
Can the IRA be defeated militarily?
In no way can or will the Provisional IRA ever be defeated militarily. The army's role has been now for some time, and I'm sure will continue to be, to help to create the conditions whereby a full, democratic, peaceful, political solution can be achieved.
How long will the long war last?
The long war will last as long as the provisional IRA have the stamina, the political motivation. I used to call it the sinews of war, but the wherewithal to sustain their campaign, and so long as there is a divided island of Ireland.
The leaders of the Republican movement have carried the coffins of countless IRA dead, as thousands have marched behind those of their victims. And soon, more dead will be buried as a result of the IRA bomb that went off prematurely near Crossmaglen today. But there's no sign that the IRA is short of recruits to replace their losses, or the weapons with which to fight on. That's why the British recognise that a military victory is unwinnable. Both sides agree on one thing, that politics, not guns, will win the long war. But victory is nowhere in sight for either side.